Hey everyone, welcome back for a story tonight. Picture this. You're walking through the bustling streets of ancient Rome and you overhear a desperate woman whispering to a vendor about a love potion. She's clutching a small vial, her eyes filled with hope and fear. The air carries the scent of frankincense from nearby stalls, mixed with something more mysterious. But here's what's wild. This wasn't just superstition. These love charms were deeply tied to Roman mythology, and the consequences of using them could be deadly. Tonight, we're stepping into the sandals of ordinary Romans who turned to the gods for help with their broken hearts. What they believed might shock you. The Forum held secrets that could make or break a heart. Behind those secrets lay a thriving marketplace that would surprise you. You're walking through the Roman Forum at dawn, and the air smells like fresh bread and something else you can't quite place. The vendors are setting up their stalls, arranging their goods for the day ahead. Most displays look normal enough: pottery, grain, olive oil, wine. But then you notice something odd. Tucked between the everyday items are small glass vials filled with mysterious liquids, tiny scrolls tied with red thread, strange bundles of herbs you don't recognize. The vendor catches your eye and nods knowingly. Welcome to Rome's secret love market. The truth is, Romans bought love charms the same way they bought their daily bread. This wasn't some back alley operation hidden in the shadows. These vendors operated right out in the open, their stalls nestled between the fish sellers and the fabric merchants. A Roman housewife might pick up some wine for dinner, a few onions for cooking, and, oh yes, a small vial to help her win back her husband's attention. It was just another item on the shopping list. But here's what made this different from your average marketplace transaction. These weren't just trinkets for the gullible. Romans took this stuff seriously. Dead seriously. The vendors themselves often claimed direct connections to Venus, the goddess of love. They'd tell customers that their potions were blessed by the goddess herself, that the ingredients came from her sacred groves, that the formulas had been passed down through generations of her priestesses. And people believed them. So what exactly were Romans buying? The ingredient lists would make your stomach turn. Crushed pearls mixed with ground bones, mashed worms blended with exotic herbs, and the deadly Spanish fly that they equated with passion, when it actually caused dangerous inflammation. The really desperate customers asked for the premium ingredients that included bodily fluids, hair, nail clippings, even more intimate substances. The idea was that these personal elements would create an unbreakable connection between the person using the potion and their target. Excavations have uncovered countless vials containing these strange mixtures throughout the Roman world. You'd see all kinds of people whispering to these vendors. Young men desperate to win over a senator's daughter, married women whose husbands had taken up with younger slaves, older men trying to compete with their sons for the attention of beautiful courtesans. The conversations were always hushed, always urgent. Customers would describe their romantic troubles in detail, and the vendor would nod sagely before recommending the perfect solution. But here's where things got dangerous. Getting caught with these love charms could ruin your life. Roman law took a dim view of love magic, and the social consequences were even worse. If word got out that you'd been buying potions to manipulate someone's feelings, your reputation was finished. For women especially, Being associated with love magic could lead to accusations of witchcraft. Men faced legal prosecution and social exile. The vendors knew this, of course. They developed elaborate codes and signals to protect their customers. A casual conversation about cooking spices might actually be a negotiation for a love potion. A bundle of herbs for medicinal purposes could contain ingredients specifically chosen to inspire desire. The whole system operated on whispers and winks, with everyone pretending they were just buying ordinary household goods. So what happened when these potions backfired? The stories Romans told each other would keep you awake at night. Take the case of Lucretius, the famous Roman philosopher and poet. According to the accounts that circulated, his wife gave him a love potion that drove him completely mad. Instead of making him more devoted to her, it destroyed his mind entirely. He eventually killed himself, unable to bear the mental anguish the potion had caused. Whether this story was true or not, Romans believed it, and it terrified them. The fear of backfiring potions created its own market. Vendors also sold protective charms and counter potions. If you suspected someone had given you a love potion, you could buy an antidote. If you worried that a rival might try to enchant your spouse, you could purchase protective amulets. The whole system fed on itself, with fear driving as much business as desire. The connection to Venus wasn't just marketing hype. Romans genuinely believed that the goddess of love monitored their romantic lives and could intervene directly. The vendors played into this belief by timing their sales to coincide with Venus's festivals and holy days. They'd claim that potions purchased during these sacred times were more powerful, blessed by the goddess herself. Some vendors even set up small shrines to Venus at their stalls, complete with offerings of flowers and wine. The social risks went beyond just legal trouble. Roman society was built on reputation and family honor. If your family name became associated with love magic, it could affect your children's marriage prospects for generations. Parents would forbid their sons and daughters from marrying into families known for using love charms. The shame could follow you for life. But the desperate kept coming. The forum vendors knew that love made people reckless, and they capitalized on that desperation. They described their ingredients in mystical terms, claiming that each element had been chosen by the gods themselves. A pinch of rare herb from the mountains where Venus once walked, a drop of water from a spring sacred to Cupid, ground stone from an altar where successful lovers had made their offerings. The business was profitable enough that some vendors specialized entirely in love magic. They developed reputations for particularly effective potions, and customers would travel from other cities to buy from them. Word of mouth was everything in this trade. If a vendor's potion actually seemed to work, their reputation would spread quickly through the gossip networks that connected Roman households. The morning rush at the forum would see dozens of transactions like this. Romans heading to work would stop by their favorite vendor for a quick consultation about their romantic troubles. The integration of love magic into daily commerce shows how deeply these beliefs had penetrated Roman society. This wasn't just about superstition, it was about hope, desperation, and the very human need to feel some control over the most uncontrollable aspect of life, love itself. But all this commerce in love magic raised a troubling question that haunted Roman minds. What would you risk to win someone's heart? The answer, as many Romans discovered, was everything. The stories Romans told themselves about perfect love came with a price that few could afford to pay. Picture a young Roman woman named Livia, clutching a small statue of Cupid, tears streaming down her face. Her husband left her 3 months ago, and she can't understand why. She's beautiful, from a good family, brought a decent dowry to the marriage. But here's what's eating at her. She keeps thinking about the story of Cupid and Psyche, the one her mother told her as a child. In that story, Psyche had to prove her love through impossible trials. Maybe, Livia thinks, she didn't prove hers well enough. This is what the myth of Cupid and Psyche did to Roman minds. It wasn't just entertainment. It became the measuring stick for every relationship in Rome. The story told of immortal woman so beautiful that she angered Venus herself. Cupid, sent to punish Psyche, instead fell in love with her. But their love came with conditions. Psyche could never look at her divine husband. She could only meet him in darkness. When curiosity got the better of her and she lit a lamp to see his face, Cupid vanished. Then came the trials. Psyche had to complete impossible tasks to win him back, sorting mountains of mixed grains, gathering golden fleece from violent sheep, fetching water from a deadly river. Finally, she had to journey to the underworld itself to retrieve a box of beauty from Persephone, Venus's final and most dangerous test. Romans heard this story and thought, so that's what real love looks like. The myth set up a template that no human relationship could possibly match. Real love, according to this story, required divine intervention, impossible trials, and the willingness to risk everything. It required perfection. Romans started judging their own relationships against this standard, and naturally, they all fell short. The pressure this created was enormous. Roman couples felt they had to prove their love was worthy of divine approval. Just getting married wasn't enough. You had to show that your relationship could survive the kind of trials Psyche faced. Some Romans actually created tests for their partners. They'd stage situations to see if their spouse would remain faithful under pressure. They'd create obstacles to see if their love could overcome them. The myth had convinced them that untested love wasn't really love at all. Compare this to what real Roman brides actually did before their weddings. They'd take ritual baths and make simple offerings to Venus, asking for the goddess's blessing on their marriage. These were humble, practical ceremonies focused on starting married life with divine favor. But the myth made even these basic rituals feel inadequate. How could washing your hands and leaving flowers at a shrine compare to descending into the underworld? The story's influence showed up everywhere in Roman courtship. Young men would present their potential brides with challenges, small versions of Psyche's trials. Can you wait for me while I'm away on business? Can you trust me even when others spread rumors? Can you love me even when I can't tell you everything? These weren't just romantic gestures. They were tests based on a mythological template that demanded proof of devotion. Parents used the story differently. They'd tell their children about Psyche's curiosity and how it nearly destroyed her happiness. The lesson was clear. Don't ask too many questions. Don't demand to know everything. Accept mystery in your relationships. This created a generation of Romans who were afraid to communicate openly with their partners. They'd rather suffer in silence than risk being seen as too demanding or curious. The anxiety this myth created was crushing. Romans would lie awake at night wondering if their relationships measured up to the divine standard. Did their love have the same intensity as Cupid's passion? Were they willing to face the same trials as Psyche? When problems arose in their marriages, Romans often blamed themselves for not living up to the mythological ideal. They'd think, if we really loved each other, like Cupid and Psyche, we wouldn't have these problems. The myth also created impossible expectations for physical beauty. Psyche was described as so beautiful that people worshipped her instead of Venus. Roman women tried to achieve this level of attractiveness, spending fortunes on cosmetics and treatments. They'd study their reflections, looking for flaws that might explain why their husbands didn't seem as devoted as Cupid. The story had convinced them that divine love required divine beauty. Roman men faced their own pressures from the myth. Cupid was a god, literally divine. How could a mortal man compete with that standard? They'd worry that their wives were comparing them to a divine lover. Some men tried to create mystery around themselves, meeting their wives only in darkness like Cupid did. Others would disappear for periods, thinking absence would make them seem more godlike and desirable. The trials aspect of the myth created particular problems for Roman marriages. Psyche had to complete specific tasks to prove her love. Roman couples started creating their own versions of these trials. A wife might demand that her husband give up certain friends or activities to prove his devotion. A husband might test his wife's loyalty by pretending to be interested in other women. These artificial challenges often did more harm than good, creating problems where none existed before. The myth's ending, where Psyche becomes immortal and joins Cupid in eternal bliss, set up another impossible standard. Romans believed true love should last forever, literally forever. This put enormous pressure on relationships to be perfect and permanent. When marriages ended, it wasn't just seen as a personal failure. It was seen as proof that the love wasn't real to begin with, because real love, according to the myth, conquered everything. The story also influenced how Romans viewed the role of the gods in their love lives. If Cupid and Psyche needed divine intervention to make their relationship work, then surely mortal couples needed even more help. This drove Romans to spend more money on love potions, more time making offerings to Venus, more energy trying to win divine favor for their relationships. The myth had convinced them that love without divine blessing was doomed to fail. The pressure to live up to Cupid and Psyche's standard created a generation of Romans who were never satisfied with their relationships. They were always looking for the next trial, the next test, the next proof that their love was real. Normal, steady, comfortable love seemed boring by comparison. The myth had taught them that real love required constant drama and impossible challenges. But here's what made this obsession truly dangerous. Romans didn't just worry about living up to divine standards. They lived in terror of what happened when they failed to meet them. Because Venus, the goddess of love, was watching, and she did not forgive easily. Her punishment was swift and merciless. You're a Roman citizen who just broke off an engagement, and suddenly everything in your life starts going wrong. Illness, sour wine, and social snubs were blamed on her wrath. In your mind, there's only one explanation for this string of disasters. You've angered Venus, the goddess of love, and now she's making you pay. This wasn't just paranoia. Romans genuinely believed that Venus actively monitored their romantic lives and would punish anyone who disrespected love. The goddess wasn't some distant figure who only cared about grand gestures. She was watching your daily choices, your private conversations, your secret thoughts about marriage and desire. And she had a temper. The terrifying thing was how easy it was to offend her without even knowing it. Romans lived in constant fear of accidentally crossing lines they couldn't see. Breaking an engagement wasn't just a personal decision. It was a direct insult to the goddess who had supposedly blessed that union in the first place. When you promised to marry someone, Venus herself was believed to be a witness to that vow. Breaking it meant you were essentially telling a goddess that her blessing didn't matter. Romans believed specific actions would trigger Venus's anger. Adultery was the obvious one, but the rules went far beyond that. Rejecting a suitor could anger the goddess, especially if that suitor had made proper offerings at her temple. Refusing to marry at all was seen as a rejection of Venus's fundamental purpose. Even being too picky about potential partners could be viewed as disrespecting the goddess's attempt to bring love into your life. The fear extended to smaller actions too. Romans worried about speaking dismissively of love in general. Making jokes about marriage could be dangerous. Criticizing other couples might draw Venus's attention. Even complaining about your own relationship problems could be seen as ungrateful. The goddess had brought you love, and if you weren't satisfied, that was your problem, not hers. When Romans believed they had offended Venus, the panic was immediate and intense. They'd rush to her temples with offerings, desperately trying to appease her anger before things got worse. Take the case of a merchant who traveled all the way to Old Paphos on Cyprus after his wife left him. He was convinced Venus had cursed him for refusing to marry his first betrothed years earlier. He spent his entire savings on protective charms at the temple, buying expensive incense from Arabia and offering cups of milk among the lilies and sweet myrtle that grew at the sacred site. The scene at Venus's shrines during these crisis moments was frantic. People would arrive carrying expensive gifts, their faces pale with fear, whispering urgent prayers for forgiveness. The offerings had to be perfect. Romans would bring pomegranates, scented oils, olive oil, honey, and wine. The cost of these appeasement rituals could bankrupt a family, but Romans believed the alternative was worse. This fear shaped every major life decision Romans made about relationships. Young people stayed in unhappy engagements because breaking them might anger Venus. Married couples remained together even when they despised each other, terrified of the goddess's punishment for abandoning their vows. Parents forced their children into marriages they didn't want, believing that Venus's anger would fall on the whole family if they interfered with what they saw as divine matchmaking. The physical consequences Romans attributed to Venus's curse were specific and frightening. Skin diseases were common signs of her displeasure. Chronic pain, especially in the back and joints, was blamed on the goddess's anger. Loss of hair, problems with fertility, and sexual dysfunction were all seen as punishments for disrespecting love. Romans would examine their bodies for signs of divine punishment, interpreting every ache and mark as evidence of Venus's wrath. The social consequences were equally devastating. Romans believed that Venus would turn people against those who had offended her. If your friends started avoiding you, if business partners became hostile, if your reputation suddenly suffered for no clear reason, Venus was probably behind it. The goddess was thought to whisper in people's ears, turning them against those who had disrespected love. The rituals Romans performed to win back Venus's favor were elaborate and expensive. They'd hire priests to perform special ceremonies, timing them to coincide with the goddess's festival days. During the Veneralia in spring and the Vinalia Urbana, Romans would make public displays of devotion, hoping to catch Venus's attention and earn her forgiveness. Sacred sex workers would carry garlands of myrtle and roses, drinking wine while Romans made their desperate offerings. Some Romans would vow to perform ongoing acts of devotion until they felt Venus's forgiveness. They'd promise to visit her temples every day for a month, to give up certain foods, to wear specific colors, to avoid certain activities. The idea was to demonstrate through sustained effort that they truly understood the seriousness of their offense and were committed to making amends. The most desperate Romans would undertake pilgrimages to Venus's most sacred sites. The journey to Old Paphos was particularly popular for those seeking forgiveness. Romans would travel across the Mediterranean, often at great personal expense and risk, to pray at the spot where Venus had supposedly emerged from the sea. They believed that showing this level of devotion would prove their sincerity to the goddess. The fear of Venus's anger created a thriving industry of religious specialists who claimed to know how to appease her. These priests and priestesses would diagnose the specific nature of someone's offense against the goddess and prescribe the appropriate rituals for forgiveness. They'd examine the person's romantic history, looking for moments when they might have disrespected love, and create custom ceremonies to address each transgression. The psychological impact of believing you were under Venus's curse was crushing. Romans would become obsessed with analyzing every aspect of their romantic history, looking for the moment when they had gone wrong. They'd replay conversations, second-guess decisions, and torture themselves with guilt over actions they might not have even considered wrong at the time. The fear was so pervasive that Romans would sometimes confess to offenses they hadn't actually committed just to be safe. They'd tell priests about thoughts they'd had, words they'd almost spoken, or actions they'd considered but never taken. The idea was that Venus knew their hearts, and even contemplating disrespect might be enough to anger her. This constant anxiety about divine judgment created a culture where Romans were afraid to make any romantic decisions without seeking religious guidance first. They'd consult priests, make offerings, and perform rituals before proposing marriage, before breaking up, before getting divorced, even before flirting with someone new. The goddess's approval became more important than personal happiness or compatibility. The belief in Venus's active involvement in human relationships was so strong that Romans would credit her with both their romantic successes and failures. When things went well, they'd thank the goddess with offerings and prayers. When things went badly, they'd assume they had somehow offended her and would begin the desperate process of seeking forgiveness. But Venus wasn't the only divine force Romans worried about. When it came to love, the fear of angering the gods started much earlier than adulthood. It began in childhood when Roman parents first started telling their children stories about what happened to mortals who dared to desire the wrong things. These warnings came wrapped in stories that Roman parents told their children every night. It's evening in a Roman household, and a father is telling his young son a story about a man who lusted after a goddess. The oil lamp flickers on the table between them. The boy listens with wide eyes as his father describes how the mortal man saw Diana bathing in a forest pool. The man couldn't look away. He watched her naked body, perfect and divine. But Diana caught him staring. She turned him into a stag, and his own hunting dogs tore him apart. The father watches his son's face carefully. The lesson is clear. Desire the wrong woman, and it will destroy you. This wasn't just a bedtime story. Roman parents used mythology as their primary tool for teaching children about love, lust, and the deadly consequences of both. These tales weren't innocent fairy tales designed to help kids fall asleep. They were carefully chosen warnings that would shape how these children approached relationships for the rest of their lives. Every story carried a message about what desire could cost you. The truth is, Roman parents believed their children's romantic futures depended on learning these lessons early. A child who didn't understand the rules of divine judgment might grow up to make fatal mistakes, so they told stories designed to terrify as much as educate. The goal wasn't just to entertain, it was to install a healthy fear of the gods and an understanding that love and lust came with serious responsibilities. Roman mothers would tell their daughters about Pandora, the first woman created by the gods. The story went that Pandora received a jar as a wedding gift, but the gods warned her never to open it. Her curiosity got the better of her. She opened the jar and released all the evils of the world: disease, war, jealousy, hatred. The message was crystal clear. Female curiosity leads to disaster. Girls who asked too many questions or wanted to know too much about their future husbands were dangerous. They might destroy everything. The story of Helen of Troy served as another warning specifically for daughters. Helen was the most beautiful woman in the world, married to a powerful king, but she abandoned her family and kingdom for a younger lover. Her choice started the Trojan War. Thousands of men died because of her desire. Roman mothers would describe the burning of Troy, the screams of dying soldiers, the grief of widowed women, all because one woman couldn't control her lust. The lesson was simple. A woman's infidelity destroys civilizations. Roman fathers had their own stories for sons. They'd tell them about Orpheus, the musician who loved his wife Eurydice so much that when she died, he traveled to the underworld to bring her back. The god of the dead was so moved by Orpheus's music that he agreed to return Eurydice, but with one condition. Orpheus couldn't look back at her until they both reached the surface. Just steps away from freedom, Orpheus looked back. Eurydice vanished forever. The message: love requires perfect discipline. One moment of weakness ruins everything. The story of Pygmalion taught boys about the power of devotion. Pygmalion was a sculptor who carved a statue of a woman so beautiful he fell in love with his own creation. He prayed to Venus every day, begging her to bring the statue to life. Finally, the goddess granted his wish. The statue became real, and Pygmalion married her. But the lesson wasn't just about love conquering all, it was about the right kind of love. Pygmalion's devotion was pure, directed toward beauty and art. He didn't lust after real women. He waited for divine approval. That's what made him worthy. Roman parents used the story of Adonis to teach children about the dangers of physical beauty. Adonis was so handsome that Venus herself fell in love with him. But his beauty attracted attention from other gods too. Eventually, a jealous god sent a wild boar to kill him. Adonis died young, destroyed by the very beauty that had made him special. The lesson was complex. Beauty is dangerous. It attracts divine attention, but that attention can be deadly. Children needed to be careful about how they used their physical gifts. The myth of Actaeon, the hunter who saw Diana naked, became a standard warning for boys approaching puberty. Parents would describe in graphic detail how Diana transformed him into a stag. His own hunting dogs, the animals he had trained and loved, didn't recognize him. They chased him through the forest. They caught him. They tore him apart while he was still conscious, still human inside his animal body. The message was terrifying. Looking at the wrong woman, even accidentally, could cost you everything. These stories created specific fears in Roman children. Boys learned to be terrified of looking too long at women, especially those above their social station. They internalized the message that uncontrolled desire would literally destroy them. Girls learned to fear their own curiosity and sexuality. They understood that asking questions or showing too much interest in men could bring disaster on their families. Roman parents timed these stories carefully. They'd tell certain tales when their children reached specific ages or life stages. The story of Pandora came when girls started showing curiosity about marriage. The myth of Actaeon was shared when boys began noticing women's bodies. The timing wasn't accidental. Parents wanted these fears to take root at exactly the moments when children might be tempted to break the rules. The stories also taught children about the social hierarchy of desire. Gods could love mortals, but mortals who pursued gods faced destruction. Nobles could desire commoners, but commoners who pursued nobles risked divine punishment. The myths reinforced the idea that love wasn't just about personal choice. It was about knowing your place in the cosmic order. Roman children internalized these lessons so deeply that they carried the fears into adulthood. They'd approach relationships with constant anxiety about divine judgment. They'd interpret every setback as potential punishment for some romantic transgression. The stories their parents told them shaped not just their behavior, but their entire understanding of how love worked. The most successful Roman parents used these myths to create children who were simultaneously passionate and disciplined. They wanted their sons and daughters to understand the power of desire while respecting the boundaries set by gods and society. The bedtime stories weren't just entertainment. They were survival guides for navigating the dangerous waters of Roman romance. But the gods weren't the only supernatural forces watching over Roman love lives. The spirits of the dead had just as much say in romantic choices as the living relatives who told these stories. Every major romantic decision required approval from a council you couldn't see but couldn't ignore. You're about to propose marriage, but first you must ask permission from the dead. You're standing in your family's atrium, staring at the lararium, the household shrine where your ancestors live. Their painted faces look down at you from small portrait. Stone figurines of your great-grandfather and grandmother sit next to offerings of wine and bread. You need their blessing before you can ask for your beloved's hand. Without it, your marriage is doomed before it starts. This wasn't just tradition. Romans believed their dead relatives had real power over the living's love lives. Your ancestors, the demons, didn't just fade away after death. They stuck around, watching your choices, judging your decisions, and actively influencing your romantic future. The spirits of your parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were like invisible matchmakers, except they could make or break your relationships from beyond the grave. The lararium was the center of this ghostly consultation process. Every Roman household had one, usually located in the main room where everyone could see it. The shrine held images of deceased family members alongside statues of the lares, the household gods, and the penates, the protective deities of the family. Many lararia also featured small frescoes or statuettes of the demones themselves. This wasn't just decoration, it was a communication center where you could talk to your dead relatives about your romantic problems. Roman families consulted these ancestral spirits about everything related to love. Should you marry this person or that person? Was your daughter's suitor worthy of the family name? What about the timing of the wedding? The ancestors supposedly had opinions about all of it. They could send signs through dreams, influence the success of your courtship, or even cause your relationship to fail if they disapproved of your choice. The rituals Romans performed to gain ancestral approval were daily affairs. Every morning before breakfast, family members would approach the lararium with offerings of bread and wine to the Lars. A cup of wine for great-grandfather, some bread for grandmother, a stick of incense for the family patriarch who died in the wars. They'd whisper their romantic concerns to these portraits and statues, asking for guidance and blessing. The conversations were specific and personal. Should I accept Marcus's proposal? Will Julia make a good wife for our son? Is this the right time for the wedding? When Romans believed their ancestors disapproved of their romantic choices, panic set in immediately. The signs of ancestral displeasure were everywhere if you knew how to look. Your intended partner suddenly becomes cold toward you. Your parents start having second thought about the match. Friends begin gossiping about your relationship. Sudden illnesses or broken contract were seen as ancestral disapproval. Romans interpreted these setbacks as clear messages from the dead that something was wrong with their romantic choices. The fear of ancestral disapproval created complex family dynamics around marriage decisions. Living relatives wouldn't just consider their own opinions about potential matches. They'd also try to figure out what the dead family members would think. A father might reject a perfectly good suitor because he believed his deceased wife wouldn't approve. A mother might push her daughter toward a marriage she didn't want because she thought her dead husband would have insisted on it. Roman wedding ceremonies were designed around gaining ancestral approval and blessing. The wedding procession would make specific stops at the family lararium. The bride and groom would offer prayers and gifts to their ancestors, acknowledging their role in the family's history and asking for their support. The ceremony emphasized that this wasn't just about two people getting married. It was about integrating the couple into a larger family unit that included both the living and the dead. The timing of weddings was often determined by what Romans believed their ancestors preferred. Certain days or months were considered more auspicious based on the ancestors' associations and religious beliefs. families would consult with diviners or check religious calendars to determine the most favorable time for the ceremony. The goal was to align the wedding with the ancestors' wishes and bring good fortune to the couple. The head of the household, typically the father, held significant authority in arranging marriages. But the ancestors' wishes were considered equally important. Their disapproval could lead to misfortune or even the failure of the marriage. This created a balance between the living father's authority and the spiritual guidance of the dead. Both had to approve for the marriage to succeed. The specific offerings Romans made to gain ancestral approval varied depending on the family's traditions and social status. Food was common: bread, fruit, honey, wine. Incense was popular because Romans believed the smoke carried their prayers to the spirit world. Small figurines or personal items that had belonged to the deceased were also offered. The key was showing respect and demonstrating that you remembered and valued your ancestors' opinions. When Romans suspected their ancestors disapproved of their romantic choices, they'd perform additional rituals to change the spirits' minds. They might seek advice from religious experts who specialized in communicating with the dead. They'd increase their offerings, pray more frequently, or even reconsider their relationship entirely. The fear of ancestral disapproval was so strong that it could break up otherwise happy couples. Roman children grew up understanding that their romantic choices would be judged not just by their living relatives, but by generations of dead family members. This created enormous pressure to make decisions that would honor the family's history and traditions. Young Romans learned to consider how their great-grandparents might feel about their romantic interests, even though they'd never met these ancestors. The psychological impact of believing your dead relatives were watching your love life was intense. Romans would second-guess their romantic feelings, wondering if their attraction to someone was real or if it was being influenced by ancestral spirits. They'd interpret every relationship problem as a potential sign that their ancestors were unhappy with their choices. The integration of ancestral worship into Roman romance created a system where the dead had as much say in marriage decisions as the living. Your great-grandfather's spirit was as important as your father's opinion. Your grandmother's ghost could be more influential than your mother's advice. This made Roman love lives incredibly complex, with multiple generations of the family members, both living and dead, weighing in on every romantic decision. But the ancestors weren't the only spiritual influences Romans believed shaped their love lives. The gods themselves were thought to send direct messages about romance, and Romans spent their nights hoping to receive divine guidance while they slept. The messages came through dreams, and Romans took them seriously. You wake up from a vivid dream where Venus herself spoke to you about your upcoming wedding. She stood in a garden of roses, her golden hair catching the sunlight, and she told you that your marriage would be blessed with 3 children. But then she frowned and warned you about a dark-haired woman who would try to interfere. You sit up in bed, your heart racing. This wasn't just a dream. This was a message from the goddess of love herself. And you need to figure out exactly what it means. Romans believed that gods communicated romantic guidance through dreams all the time. This wasn't some rare occurrence reserved for heroes and emperors. Ordinary people expected to receive divine messages about their love lives while they slept. The gods were watching your romantic choices and they had opinions about them. Dreams were their preferred method of letting you know what they thought about your relationships, your marriage prospects, and your romantic decisions. The problem was that misinterpreting these divine messages could lead to absolute disaster. Get the meaning wrong, and you might marry the wrong person, reject your true love, or anger the gods with your poor choices. Romans lived in constant fear of missing important signs or reading them incorrectly. A dream that seemed positive might actually be a warning. A nightmare might be telling you to take action rather than avoid it. The stakes were enormous. Romans developed complex systems for decoding romantic dreams and their meanings. Different gods sent different types of messages. Venus appeared in dreams about marriage and desire. Juno sent dreams about family and children. Mars might appear in dreams about passionate love affairs. Each deity had their own symbolic language, and you needed to understand the specific vocabulary they used to communicate with mortals. The timing of dreams mattered too. Dreams that came just before dawn were considered more reliable than those that occurred in the middle of the night. Dreams during certain phases of the moon carried different meanings. Dreams that happened on festival days dedicated to love gods were especially significant. Romans would track when their romantic dreams occurred, looking for patterns that might help them interpret the messages. Dream interpretation influenced major relationship decisions and timing in Roman society. People would delay marriages based on troubling dreams. They'd break engagements they received divine warnings while sleeping. Some Romans would refuse to meet potential partners until they had a positive dream about the relationship. The gods' nighttime messages shaped the entire timeline of Roman romance. Professional dream interpreters became essential figures in Roman love lives. These specialists studied the symbolic language of dreams, particularly those related to romance and relationships. They knew which symbols indicated divine approval and which ones warned of trouble ahead. Romans would rush to these experts the morning after significant dreams, desperate to understand what the gods were trying to tell them about their romantic futures. The dream interpreters had extensive knowledge of religious lore and symbolism. They understood the complex relationships between different gods and how those relationships affected human romance. A dream featuring both Venus and Juno might mean something completely different from a dream with Venus alone. The interpreters could decode these divine interactions and explain their implications for mortal love lives. Specific dream symbols carried particular meanings related to love and relationships. Roses in dreams usually indicated Venus's approval of a romantic choice. Doves were positive signs for marriage and fertility. Swans suggested long-lasting love, but the meanings weren't always straightforward. A withered rose might warn of a relationship that would start well, but end badly. A dead dove could indicate problems with childbearing or family harmony. Animals in romantic dreams carried specific messages from the gods. Lions suggested passionate but potentially dangerous love. Deer indicated gentle, faithful partners. Snakes warned of deception or betrayal. Bulls pointed to fertility and strong family connections. The dream interpreters knew hundreds of these animal symbols and their romantic meanings. The appearance of specific gods in dreams provided direct guidance about love and relationships. If Venus appeared happy and smiling, your romantic choices had divine approval.
If she seemed angry or disappointed, you needed to reconsider your decisions. Other gods brought different messages. Diana's appearance might warn against lustful behavior. You never could suggest choosing wisdom over passion in romantic matters. The anxiety these dream interpretations created in Roman relationships was intense. People would wake up from confusing dreams and spend days worrying about what they meant. They'd second-guess their romantic feelings, wondering if their attraction to someone was real or if the gods were warning them away. Every relationship problem could be traced back to some dream symbol they might have misunderstood. Romans would delay major romantic decisions while waiting for clarifying dreams. A man might postpone his proposal until he received a positive dream about his intended bride. A woman might refuse suitors until she dreamed about her ideal husband.
This created a culture where divine approval through dreams became more important than personal feelings or practical considerations. The professional dream interpretation industry thrived because of these beliefs. Interpreters charged significant fees for their services, and successful ones built reputations that attracted clients from across the Roman world. Some specialized in romantic dreams exclusively, becoming experts in the symbolic language of love gods. They'd maintain detailed records of their interpretations and their accuracy, building credibility through successful predictions. Dream journals became common among Romans who wanted to track patterns in their divine messages. They'd record their dreams immediately upon waking, noting every detail they could remember. These records helped them identify recurring symbols and themes in their romantic dreams. The journals also provided evidence when consulting with professional interpreters about the meanings of their nighttime visions. Romans would sometimes perform rituals before sleep to encourage romantic dreams from the gods. They'd make offerings to Venus or other love deities, asking for guidance about specific relationship questions. They'd sleep with certain herbs under their pillows or wear special amulets designed to attract divine dream messages. These practices turned bedtime into another opportunity for religious consultation about romantic matters. The dream interpretation system provided Romans with a sense of divine guidance and support in their romantic lives, but it also created enormous pressure to decode every nighttime vision correctly. The fear of missing important messages or misunderstanding divine warnings added another layer of anxiety to Roman relationships, making love even more complicated than it already was. But while Romans waited for divine dream messages about their romantic futures, they weren't content to rely solely on heavenly guidance. They also turned to earthly solutions, seeking out those who claimed to have the power to create love through more tangible means. In a dimly lit Roman shop, an old woman grinds mysterious ingredients while whispering incantations. The air is thick with strange smells. Sweet cinnamon mixes with something that makes your nose wrinkle. She's crushing what looks like dried beetles between two stones. Her fingers are stained green from handling herbs you don't recognize. This isn't your typical Roman merchant. She's an alchemist, and she's preparing a love potion that someone will drink tonight. The ingredients Romans put in their love potions weren't just random herbs thrown together. Each component had deep mythological significance and was believed to channel the power of specific gods. The old woman reaches for a twisted root that looks almost human. It's mandrake, sacred to Venus herself. Romans believed this root grew where the goddess's tears had fallen to earth. The plant's human-like shape convinced them it could understand human desires and amplify them. But these weren't harmless garden herbs. Some ingredients were genuinely dangerous, and Romans knew it. The crushed beetles the woman was grinding are Spanish fly, emerald green insects that cause intense burning when consumed. The feeling of heat in the body was mistaken for passion. Romans didn't understand that this warmth came from inflammation, not desire. People died from these potions. The toxicity was so well known that Spanish fly was rumored to have killed Ferdinand II of Aragon, who used it to improve his virility after his wife's death. The specific components Romans believed would create irresistible attraction ranged from exotic spices to bodily fluids. Ground pearls were mixed with rare saffron imported from distant provinces. Cinnamon, cardamom, ginger, and pepper were so strongly associated with love magic that their distribution was sometimes forbidden. But the really desperate customers wanted more intimate ingredients. Hair from the beloved person, nail clippings, even bodily fluids. The idea was that these personal elements would create an unbreakable spiritual connection, each ingredient connected to different Roman deities and their powers. Venus claimed the mandrake root and anything that grew from the earth in beautiful forms. Mars governed the more aggressive ingredients like the Spanish fly and anything that created heat or burning sensations. Bacchus, the god of wine, blessed the fermented bases used in many potions. Diana controlled the plants that had to be harvested under moonlight. Using the right ingredient meant channeling the right god's power for your specific romantic problem. The elaborate preparation rituals Romans believed made potions effective were as important as the ingredients themselves. The old woman times her grinding to coincide with Venus's evening appearance in the sky. She whispers prayers to the goddess with each turn of the pestle. The mixture has to be prepared during specific phases of the moon. Some potions required the alchemist to fast for days before preparing them. Others needed to be made by someone who had never been married, or by a woman who had borne exactly 3 children. The social network of suppliers who provided these ingredients was vast and often illegal. Merchants imported exotic spices from Egypt and Arabia. Grave robbers dug up recently buried bodies to harvest organs and bones. Sailors brought back strange plants from distant shores. Prostitutes collected bodily fluids from their clients. Gladiator trainers sold the sweat and blood of famous fighters. The whole system operated in shadows, with suppliers and customers using coded language to avoid detection. Local herb gatherers knew which plants to collect and when. They'd venture into sacred groves at midnight to harvest herbs that supposedly grew stronger under starlight. Some ingredients could only be gathered during thunderstorms or eclipses. The timing wasn't just superstition. Romans believed the gods were most active during these dramatic moments, and plants collected then would carry more divine power. The really expensive ingredients came from temple complexes where priests claimed direct connection to the gods. A pinch of ash from Venus's altar cost more than most Romans earned in a month. Water from sacred spring had to be transported in special containers to maintain its power. Incense that had been burnt during religious ceremonies carried the prayers of hundreds of worshippers and was believed to be especially effective. Romans tested and measured the effectiveness of their love potions through careful observation and word of mouth. Customers would return to report whether the potion had worked. Success stories spread quickly through the gossip networks that connected Roman households. The alchemists kept detailed records of which combinations worked best for different types of romantic problems. A potion that worked for winning back a straying husband might be useless for attracting a new lover. The testing process was dangerous. Alchemists would sometimes try new combinations on slaves or prisoners before selling them to paying customers. They'd observe the effects, noting which ingredients caused illness, madness, or death. This brutal experimentation helped them refine their recipes. But it also meant that many potions contained ingredients that were known to be harmful. The old woman in the shop has been perfecting her craft for decades. She knows which customers are desperate enough to pay premium prices for the most dangerous ingredients. She can tell from a person's description of their romantic troubles exactly which combination of herbs and toxins will give them the results they want. Or at least the results they think they want. The real ingredients in Roman love potions were a mixture of genuinely psychoactive plants, toxic substances, and harmless herbs chosen for their symbolic value. Datura, also known as Jimson weed or devil's trumpet, could induce hallucinations, psychosis, or death. Mixed with safer herbs like rose petals or lavender, it created a potion that was both dangerous and aromatic. The hallucinations caused by Datura might make someone believe they were experiencing divine visions or supernatural attraction. People actually believed these potions worked, partly because of the placebo effect, and partly because some ingredients did cause real physical reactions. The burning sensation from Spanish fly was interpreted as passion. The disorientation from Datura was seen as love-induced madness. The sweet taste of honey and wine made the bitter herbs palatable. Romans who drank these potions expected to feel different, and their expectations shaped their experiences. The alchemist's reputation depended on satisfied customers, so she'd often include ingredients that were guaranteed to cause some kind of reaction. Even if the potion didn't inspire love, it would do something noticeable. The customer would feel the effects and assume the magic was working. This kept them coming back for more potions and brought in new customers through recommendations. But using these potions came with serious risks beyond just physical harm. The gods who watched over Roman love lives didn't just punish those who used magic to manipulate hearts. They reserved their harshest judgment for those who broke the sacred promises made in their names. A Roman man stands before his wedding altar, knowing he's about to break a vow to another woman. His hands shake as he reaches for the sacred water. Behind him, guests chatter excitedly about the ceremony. They don't know that 6 months ago he promised to marry his cousin in a private ceremony. That promise was made in front of a shrine to Juno, the goddess of marriage. He whispered the words while holding sacred bread. Now he's about to marry someone else entirely. The gods witnessed his first vow. They're about to witness him break it. Romans believed marriage vows were sacred contracts witnessed by the gods, not just personal promises between two people. When you made a marriage vow, you weren't just talking to your future spouse. You were speaking directly to the divine powers who controlled love, family, and fate. Juno, the protector of marriage, was listening. Venus, the goddess of love, was watching. The household gods of both families were present. These deities didn't just observe your promises. they became guarantors of your commitment. Breaking a marriage vow meant breaking a contract with the gods themselves. The terrifying consequences Romans expected for breaking these divine promises went far beyond social embarrassment. The gods didn't just get angry, they got vengeful. Romans believed oath breakers faced specific punishments designed to match their crimes. A man who abandoned his wife might find his own business partners abandoning him. A woman who broke her marriage vows could expect her children to reject her when they grew up. The punishment always fit the betrayal. Romans believed the gods would target the oath breaker's most precious possessions first. Your money would disappear through bad investments and theft. Your health would fail through mysterious illnesses that no doctor could cure. Your friends would turn against you without explanation. Your family would suffer misfortunes that everyone would blame on your broken vows. The gods knew exactly how to hurt you where it mattered most. The punishments weren't limited to this life either. Romans believed oath breakers faced eternal consequences in the afterlife. The underworld had special sections reserved for people who had violated sacred promises. These souls would spend eternity reliving their betrayals, experiencing the pain they had caused others. Some myths described oath breakers being forced to drink boiling water or being torn apart by vengeful spirits. The torment was endless and perfectly calibrated to match the specific vow they had broken. Fear of divine retribution kept many Romans trapped in unhappy marriages. They'd rather suffer in silence than risk the gods' anger. A woman married to a cruel husband would endure years of abuse rather than break her sacred vows. A man tied to an unfaithful wife would accept her betrayals rather than seek divorce. The fear of divine punishment was often stronger than the desire for personal happiness. Romans would tell themselves that earthly suffering was temporary, but the gods' anger was forever. The elaborate rituals Romans performed to try to break vows safely were complex and expensive. You couldn't just walk away from a marriage. You had to negotiate with the gods who had witnessed your original promises. This meant extensive offerings, prayers, and ceremonies designed to win divine forgiveness. Some Romans would spend months preparing for these rituals, consulting priests and religious experts about the proper procedures. The first step was acknowledging the gravity of what you were about to do. Romans would visit temples dedicated to marriage gods, bringing expensive gifts and public confessions of their intentions. They'd explain their reasons for wanting to break their vows, hoping to convince the gods that their situation was exceptional. The offerings had to be significant enough to demonstrate true remorse. Cheap gifts suggested you weren't taking the divine contract seriously. Some Romans attempted to find loopholes in their original vows. They'd consult legal experts who specialized in religious law, looking for technical reasons why their marriage might not be valid. Maybe the ceremony hadn't been performed correctly. Maybe the proper gods hadn't been invoked. Maybe the timing had been wrong. These legal maneuvers were attempts to avoid divine punishment by proving the original vows had never been properly made. The social and religious consequences for families when marriage vows were broken extended far beyond the couple involved. Roman society was built on family honor, and broken vows stained entire bloodlines. The children of divorced parents faced questions about their legitimacy. The extended family dealt with social stigma that could last for generations. other families would avoid marriage alliances with oath breakers, viewing them as untrustworthy and cursed by the gods. These beliefs influenced Roman divorce practices and legal proceedings in profound ways. The law provided mechanisms for divorce, but the religious and social barriers were enormous. Even when divorce was legally possible, the fear of divine punishment made many Romans reluctant to pursue it. The legal system reflected these concerns by requiring extensive justification for divorce. You had to prove that continuing the marriage would be worse than risking the gods' anger. Roman divorce courts became places where people tried to demonstrate that their situation was so extreme that the gods would understand their need to break their vows. Adultery was one of the few reasons considered acceptable for divorce because it meant the other person had broken their vows first. Extreme cruelty might also justify divorce because it suggested the marriage had already been cursed by the gods. But simple incompatibility or falling out of love wasn't enough. The gods expected you to honor your commitments regardless of your personal feelings. The process of Roman divorce involved religious ceremonies designed to formally release both parties from their divine obligations. These rituals were as important as the legal proceedings. You had to perform specific ceremonies to notify the gods that the marriage was ending. You had to make offerings to appease any divine anger. You had to seek forgiveness for breaking the sacred bonds that had been witnessed by the gods. Women faced additional challenges when seeking divorce because Roman law and religious practice favored men. A woman who wanted to divorce her husband had to prove more serious grounds than a man seeking to divorce his wife. The gods were believed to be more forgiving of men's decisions to end marriages, reflecting the patriarchal nature of Roman society. Women who initiated divorce proceedings faced greater social stigma and religious consequences. The real-world impact of these beliefs was enormous. Romans lived in constant fear of accidentally offending the gods through their romantic choices. They'd stay in miserable marriages for decades rather than risk divine punishment. They'd make expensive offerings and perform elaborate rituals to maintain the gods' favor. The belief in sacred marriage vows created a society where personal happiness was secondary to divine approval. But not all Roman religious practices around marriage were about fear and punishment. The same gods who punished oath breakers also blessed faithful couples. Romans knew that winning divine favor from the start was far easier than trying to repair relationships with angry deities later. This understanding drove them to create elaborate ceremonies designed to ensure their marriages began with the strongest possible divine blessing. Roman wedding ceremonies required divine approval at every step, and the rituals began before dawn. It's your wedding day in ancient Rome, and before you can kiss your bride, you must perform a dozen different rituals. The sun isn't even fully up yet, but you're already at the temple making sacrifices. Your hands are covered in the blood of a lamb you just offered to Juno. The priest is examining the animal's liver, looking for signs that the goddess approves of your marriage. If the omens are bad, you'll have to start over with another sacrifice. Your bride stands beside you, her face painted white with chalk, her hair arranged in 6 braids and covered with a flame-colored veil. She's as nervous as you are. One mistake today could doom your entire relationship. The elaborate ceremonies Romans performed to ensure divine blessing on their marriages weren't optional extras. They were essential requirements for a valid union. Missing even one ritual could anger the gods and curse your marriage from the very beginning. Romans believed that weddings without proper divine blessing were doomed to fail. The gods were watching every moment of your ceremony. They were judging whether you deserved their support. Get it wrong, and you'd face a lifetime of marital problems that no amount of love could overcome. The specific rituals Roman couples performed started before dawn and continued long after sunset. The bride began her day by making offerings to her household gods, officially saying goodbye to her childhood home. She'd place flowers and food at the family shrine, asking her ancestors to bless her transition to a new family. The groom performed similar rituals at his own home, seeking approval from his family's protective spirits. These weren't quick prayers. They were elaborate ceremonies involving specific words, gestures, and offerings that had to be performed exactly right. The wedding sacrifice at the temple was the most critical ritual of the day. The couple would bring a perfect animal, usually a pig or sheep, to be killed in honor of Juno. The priest would examine the victim's internal organs, looking for signs of divine approval. The liver had to be the right color. The heart had to be healthy. The intestines had to be properly arranged. If anything looked wrong, the gods were sending a message that the marriage shouldn't proceed. The couple would have to bring another animal and try again. Different gods required different types of offerings and ceremonies throughout the wedding day. Venus demanded roses and sweet wine. Mars wanted weapons and red meat. The household gods of both families expected bread and salt. Each deity had specific preferences that had to be honored. The bride and groom would move from shrine to shrine, altar to altar, making the proper offerings to each god who might influence their marriage. Skip one deity, and that god might spend the rest of your marriage making you miserable. The role of priest in validating these divine connections was absolutely crucial. You couldn't just perform these rituals yourself. They had to be witnessed and approved by official representatives of the gods. The priests would examine every detail of your ceremony, making sure you followed the proper procedures. They'd check that you used the right words, made the correct gestures, and offered appropriate gifts. Their approval was like a divine stamp of authenticity on your marriage. The timing of ceremonies with festival days added another layer of complexity. Romans believed that certain days were more auspicious for weddings than others. Marriages aligned with the Veneralia in spring received Venus's special blessing. During the Vinalia Urbana, sacred sex workers would process through the streets carrying garlands, their rituals honoring Venus and blessing all unions celebrated that day. The position of Venus in the sky mattered. The phase of the moon was important. Some months were considered unlucky for marriage. The couple might have to wait months for the right celestial alignment. The wedding feast itself was a religious ceremony disguised as a party. Every dish had symbolic meaning. The wedding cake was offered to Jupiter before anyone could eat it. The wine was blessed by multiple priests. Guests were expected to make toasts that honored the gods rather than just celebrating the couple. The conversations were carefully monitored to make sure no one said anything that might anger the deities. Even the music and dancing had to follow religious guidelines. The torchlit procession that moved the bride from her father's house to her new home was the most elaborate ritual of the entire day. The groom led the procession, carrying a torch blessed by Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. Family members and friends followed, bearing gifts and playing music that honored the gods. The bride was surrounded by married women who chanted prayers for her fertility and happiness. The procession had to follow specific routes through the city, stopping at certain shrines and temples to make additional offerings. The day after the wedding brought even more rituals and responsibilities. The Apollia was when relatives and friends visited the newlyweds' home to present gifts. These weren't just social calls, they were religious ceremonies where the community officially welcomed the bride into her new family. The gifts themselves had to be appropriate for the gods, furniture decorated with domestic scenes, pots and jewelry that honored the household deities. Everything had to demonstrate that the community supported the marriage and believed it deserved divine blessing. The cost and complexity of ensuring proper divine blessing for a marriage could bankrupt a Roman family. The animals for sacrifice were expensive. The priests charged significant fees for their services. The offerings to multiple gods required costly ingredients imported from distant provinces. The wedding feast had to include specific foods that honored different deities. Wine had to be poured out as offering throughout the day. Flowers, incense, and precious oils were burned in massive quantities. A proper Roman wedding cost more than most people earned in several years. The priests who oversaw these ceremonies maintained detailed records of which rituals had been performed and how well they'd been executed. These records were like report cards for marriages. Couples whose weddings received high marks from the religious authorities could expect social acceptance and divine favor. Those who cut corners or made mistakes faced ongoing scrutiny and suspicion. The priestly records influenced how the community viewed the marriage for years to come. But even the most elaborate wedding ceremonies and divine blessings couldn't protect Roman couples from every threat to their happiness. The gods might approve of your marriage, but that didn't stop jealous rivals from trying to destroy what you'd built. And when Romans suspected someone was working against their relationship, they didn't just get angry, they got paranoid. The suspicion could consume your entire life. You're a Roman whose love life has suddenly turned disastrous, and you suspect your romantic rival has cursed you. 3 weeks ago, everything was perfect. Your intended bride smiled when she saw you. Her father welcomed you into his home. The wedding preparations were moving smoothly. Now she won't even look at you. Her family has stopped returning your messages. The dowry negotiations have stalled. Your friend whispered behind your back. You've developed a strange rash on your arms. Your business deals keep falling through. There's only one explanation that makes sense. Someone has cursed you. Romans believed rivals could use magic to sabotage their romantic prospects, and they took this threat seriously. This wasn't just superstition, it was spiritual warfare. Your romantic competitors weren't just trying to win over your beloved through charm and gifts. They were actively working to destroy your chances through supernatural means. The competition for desirable partners was so intense that Romans expected their rivals to use every weapon available, including curses, hexes, and magical attacks designed to ruin their love lives. The paranoia that surrounded Roman romantic competition was crushing. You couldn't trust anyone. That friend who seems supportive of your relationship might secretly be working against you. The merchant who sold you wedding gifts could be in league with your enemies. Even family members might harbor jealousy that could lead them to sabotage your happiness. Romans lived in constant fear that someone was plotting their romantic downfall through magical means. The specific signs Romans looked for to identify romantic curses were everywhere once you knew what to watch for. Sudden changes in your beloved's behavior toward you, unexplained illnesses that struck just before important romantic events, business problems that seemed to come out of nowhere, friends turning cold for no apparent reason, physical symptoms like rashes, headaches, or stomach problems that doctors couldn't explain, dreams filled with dark imagery or frightening encounters with unknown figures. Romans believed these were all evidence that someone had targeted them with magical attacks. The detective work Romans did to identify who had cursed them was elaborate and systematic. You'd start by making a list of everyone who might have reason to want your relationship to fail. Rejected suitors were the obvious suspects. Business rivals who might benefit from your family's misfortune. Friends who had expressed jealousy about your romantic success. Even distant relatives who might feel slighted by your engagement. Romans would watch these suspects carefully, looking for signs of magical activity or connections to known practitioners of love magic. The investigation often involved hiring professional curse detectors, specialists who claimed they could identify the source of magical attacks. These experts would examine your symptoms, study your romantic history, and use various divination techniques to pinpoint who had cursed you. They'd look for physical evidence too, unusual objects buried near your home, strange powders sprinkled around your property, curse tablets hidden in places where you'd be sure to find them. The detective work could take months and cost enormous amounts of money. The counter curses and protective rituals Romans used to defend their love lives were just as elaborate as the original attacks. Once you identified your attacker, you had several options. You could hire a magical practitioner to create a stronger curse that would overpower the original hex. You could perform purification rituals designed to cleanse yourself of the magical contamination. You could create protective amulets and charms that would shield you from future attacks. The most aggressive approach was to launch a counterattack, sending curses back at your enemies with interest. The underground network of magical practitioners Romans turned to for help was vast and secretive. These specialists operated in the shadows, offering their services to desperate Romans who believed they were under magical attack. Some focused on creating curses and hexes, others specialized in protective magic and curse removal. The most skilled practitioners could do both, serving as magical bodyguards for their wealthy clients. They worked out of hidden shops, private homes, and sometimes even from booths in the regular markets disguised as ordinary merchants. The curse tablets Romans used were crafted from lead or other durable materials and inscribed with specific spells designed to destroy their target's romantic prospects. These tablets were then buried in tombs, thrown into wells, or hidden in temples dedicated to underworld gods. The tablets contained detailed instructions about what the gods should do to the victim. Make them ugly, give them bad breath, cause their beloved to forget them, turn their friends against them. The tablets were like supernatural hit contracts, requesting divine intervention to destroy someone's love life. The magical papyri provided detailed instructions for various types of romantic warfare. These ancient texts contained recipes for love potions, curse formulas, and protective spells. The ingredients were often dangerous and expensive. Human remains stolen from graves, exotic herbs imported from distant lands, bodily fluids collected from unsuspecting victims. The papyri read like manuals for psychological warfare, teaching Romans how to attack their rivals' minds, hearts, and reputations through supernatural means. These beliefs escalated romantic rivalries into full-scale spiritual warfare. Instead of simply competing for someone's affections, Romans were fighting invisible battles against enemies who might be trying to destroy them through magic. The competition became about more than just being the most attractive or suitable partner. It became about having the most powerful magical protection, the most skilled curse practitioners, and the most elaborate defensive rituals. Romance turned into an arms race of supernatural weapons and protections. The typical Roman who believed a rival had cursed their romantic prospects would immediately begin a multi-pronged defensive campaign. First, they'd visit temples dedicated to protective gods, making expensive offerings and seeking divine intervention. Second, they'd hire magical practitioners to identify the source of the curse and create counterattacks. Third, they'd begin wearing protective amulets and performing daily purification rituals. Fourth, they'd launch their own magical attacks against suspected enemies. The whole process could consume months of time and enormous financial resources. The fear of romantic curses influenced major life decisions about marriage and relationships. Romans would avoid potential partners whose families were known to use magic. They'd delay weddings until protective rituals could be performed. They'd break off engagements if they suspected magical interference. The constant threat of supernatural attack made every romantic choice feel dangerous and fraught with potential consequences that could destroy not just your relationship, but your health, wealth, and social standing. This was the reality of Roman love. Every romantic decision carried the weight of divine judgment, ancestral approval, and supernatural warfare. The pursuit of happiness had become a complex web of rituals, fears, and beliefs that touched every aspect of daily life. Romans turned love into a battlefield where gods, ancestors, and rivals all had weapons pointed at your heart. So there you have it. Ancient Roman beliefs about love and mythology created a complex web of hope, fear, and social control that shaped every aspect of romantic life. Romans couldn't just fall in love and get married. They had to navigate divine approval, ancestral spirits, dream messages, love potions, curses, and elaborate rituals. Understanding these beliefs helps us see the deep human need to find meaning and divine approval in our most intimate relationships. The truth is, modern love might not be so different from ancient Roman struggles with desire, commitment, and the search for lasting happiness. Thanks for watching or listening. If you would like to explore other content, comment down below what you are interested in, or show some love and support for our fellow sleepers down there. Also, if you've made it this far, like and subscribe. It truly means the world.